Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince continues to chat with me about changes he's observed and decisions that came out this year. Hillary joins me to answer a question from a listener who wants to know how a student can demonstrate interest to a college and when should they start. David Blobaum, the founder of Summit Prep, and I have our final segment in our debate about whether selective colleges should mandate the ACT or the SAT. We'll have the final segment in my interview with Jim Bock, Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore College. And Jim is not only helping us to understand SWAT, he also talks to us about the value of the liberal arts, and he addresses some other issues higher ed is facing right now.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Any other school we haven't talked about that you wanna mention? And and this kind of thing, we almost need to look at it again because there's still not just Berkeley and UCLA, but IBs and some of the most selective into private schools. Regular decisions not out yet on March 20th. A lot is going to be out. A lot is going to be out in the next 10 days.
Yeah,
probably could almost do a part 2 and see what we observe from decisions that come out in the next 10 days, or even later, and see what waitlist activity. Probably it'd be better to look at it around June. I mean, we've seen most of the waitlist activity will be over. I know the UCs always have crazy waitlist activity. Michigan has crazy waitlist. Every year, we usually have 3 kids that get off the waitlist at Michigan, 2 or 3.
Yeah. The one thing we played this game. I went with my partner down to Palm Springs this weekend, and we played this game. Like, what predictions do you have? Because it's a really volatile time in the world.
It's a fun game.
It was a fun game. And one of the predictions was, do you think that, like, one of the things that I would say would have been a prediction is, last year we talked a lot about Northeastern, and they're very selective. I felt like they were playing their cards really close in their admission. This particular year, I felt like strong, interesting students that weren't going to require a lot of financial assistance were getting an offer from Northeastern. And it might not be Boston, but it would be New York, or their London, or their Hills.
I see that all the time. I mean, I've seen this now for years. We know that 6% admit rate now that they put up there. They don't count people getting the satellite campuses. So I'm no longer surprised when good kids, but not kids that were necessarily academic pistols, get in Northeastern, especially if they can pay full. Like, it's very clear they're need aware.
Yes.
And I think they're, they've made this commitment to say we meet 100% of need. And in order to do that, they need to lock in a boatload of full pays. So they're really need aware. And I was talking to a family that I'm working with. It's attends a very good Boston public school. And they were like, take a look at our data. Almost everybody gets in Northeastern from here. Like, it's wow. It's not even an allure the way that they've created this image out there with their acceptance rate because they don't count all those. I mean, to me, that's really, it's almost not truth in advertising, right? Like that, you've created this pathway, send them to Mills College, send them overseas, and don't count them in your acceptance numbers.
Right.
I was telling somebody that the other day because they were, this doesn't make sense. All these kids are getting Northeastern and they have this acceptance rate. And I explained that to them. They said, ooh, that's shady. But
Yes.
different people do different things, and it's an interesting school. For some people, it's amazing because of the unique co-op, but then others don't. It's such a non-traditional college experience, with people coming back and forth like ships in the night, and not a sense of necessary camaraderie with your class. That it's not the experience everybody's looking for. It's polarizing is not the right word. It's just people have such disparate reactions to that school. They're all in and absolutely love it, and it can be absolutely great, especially if you're very job focused. I mean, you can really, really get some amazing. It's not just jobs; you can just have amazing life experiences through all of the things that you can do there.
Yes.
But it's not what everybody wants. If they want, the traditional experience with the sports and more of a residential. Boston's got an issue. There's such only 48 square miles in Boston, so they don't really have the housing capacity to provide housing for so many students. So that leads to a different kind of experience. So, this is why it's all about fit and match. Like it's not, some people it's amazing for, others it just doesn't work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still think there's a little bit, we'll probably talk more about this in the recap April 1st, after April 1st. But I do think I still see sort of a gender gap. I see usually boys have more selective options than somebody who's female with the same sort of stats. They're obviously not the same person ever, but I was really
Now, I had a VP of enrollment who's been in the profession for maybe 25 years, multiple schools,
Mhm.
tell me we've never seen a gender gap like this. Like, I don't know what's going on out there. And we were just grappling with each other, like what was causing that. Was it COVID? How COVID impacted? We were just kind of speculating together. But he was telling me that they've never seen this disparity in the strength of the girl pool versus their boy pool like they have this year. I don't know if you heard, you might not have heard because I just did it, this episode last Monday where I went through like 15 different changes that I'm expecting because of all the financial pressure colleges are under.
Oh, I haven't heard that, but I will listen.
Yeah, I'm expecting a lot, and as I interview different admission leaders, I'm going to ask them. I've got an interview coming up with Andy Strickler in 5 days, and because Andy will always give it to me straight, right? He's really good that way. I want to kind of go through and see what he thinks about these things. So far, I've had a conversation with one senior person who affirmed all of them, right? Like,
Oh, okay, great.
yeah, basically this, because it's those major R1 schools that are getting hit the most by the NIH funding. They're the ones that are out $100 million, 200. I mean, you and I are going to talk about Hopkins 800, but they also are the ones that at least have the ability to expand their class. They have the demand there. They might have to work on some things like where are we going to put them?
Right.
We need to work out something with hotels. Can we convert doubles to quads? Like we got to work on some things like that. But that squeeze is happening where that trickles down, and the school that doesn't yield well against those schools, they feel that. And as the school I talked to said, we're getting squeezed on both sides because those one percenters, I call them a lot of times, those reach for alls, they're tough for us to compete against. So they're expanding their class. So we're losing that way. Meanwhile, schools that we usually do well against are beefing up their merit money. And as people look and see, concern with the economy, concern with 529 plans or retirement plans, people getting more conservative, financially conservative, they say, hey, this merit offer is looking like too good to be true. So school that I talked to said we're going out with 20% more offers, 20%
Wow.
more offers just to protect ourselves because we're getting squeezed up the totem pole and lower on the totem pole. Yeah.
Hmm. That's, I'm glad you talked about that. I think one other thing I observed is I did have an applicant who took a break and has had or will have a successful career in music, but they took a 3-year break, and then the family lost the house in the fires, and they said this might be the jumpstart because they realized because of COVID, they ended their high school ended during COVID, and then they kind of launched their career and decided to put college on the back burner. That they were kind of missing their generation. Like, I'm going to be, and they were like, I'm going to be too old. So if I don't go back, and so that was sort of a kickstart. And I was really pleased to see LA schools were so generous in extending the deadline. And so far, that particular individual has terrific options. And I just was really excited for that individual because I felt like the schools could see his potential because he had had success in entertainment, but also they were willing to, be
When you
flexible.
say LA schools, are you talking about UCLA and USC?
I'm talking about USC. We did not approach the University of California because the fires took place so far after
Sure.
the deadline. So we didn't even go there, but Oxy, Chapman, LMU, USC were really,
So all the private schools, and you're talking about the regular admission January deadlines. Those
they were just
deadlines,
really terrific because they made the decision after the fires, but the fires was what they realized, like, this is the, kickstart I need to.
Do you have a sense, I pick up a certain sense nationally on certain things, Vince, and one that I'm picking up is that LMU feels like it's really on the rise nationally to me. Like there's more
Yes.
interest in it than before.
Yes.
They're yielding better than they did before. I can see their selectivity has changed a bit. Like it's not uncommon for me to have a kid apply to LMU, Santa Clara, and USD, and for them to get in Santa Clara and USD and not get in LMU. Like that's not surprising. That's not
Yes.
surprising.
Yeah.
And they're like a lot of students are seriously considering them that are going to have more selective options. And I tell you, after spending half a day there when I was there, it's very understandably why. Like the campus is amazing.
Yeah.
The location is amazing. The size of the school is great. You've got just that up on that hill. It's just
Yes.
really pretty. And they have a lot of really good programs.
Yeah.
Like, they're not just, screenwriting, playwriting, and all that's film. And you know what I mean? Like there's so much more than that. It feels like
Yes.
things like their business and engineering are just getting beefed up and feels run pretty smoothly. I mean, you already know that I love those other two schools, San Diego and Santa Clara. Like I'm always putting those on lists. But, the other thing is you get to be in LA, but you're in such a nice part of LA that you get your self-contained sort of safe space, green spaces, quad, and it's just very different than, I mean, USC is spectacular, obviously, but the campus, but then not everybody doesn't always like that location. And it's $100,000. I mean, LMU is not great with merit money. They're not great, but they're not the $100,000 like USC.
Yes.
Someone might end up paying 65 there that gets asked 95 at USC. That's a big difference. It's just a school, and it doesn't feel cramped either. Like I love Oxy, you and I both love Oxy, but some people Oxy's too small. LMU still feels kind of spacious. I don't know. It just has. I mean, all three of those schools, I love them. All three of them: University of San Diego, Santa Clara, and Loyola Marymount. And if you want to ask me of all the 20 I visited on my trip there, those were the standouts. In fairness, UCLA was also very impressive, and in a different way, USC was stunning. I definitely see why USC has their passionate followers.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's great to hear. I think you're absolutely right about LMU. You're also really close to the airport, so it's never hard to get away from LMU if you have to quickly. And you're right, it's safe. You're on this plateau, so there's not going to be some fire appearing out of nowhere making you evacuate quickly. The neighborhood is safe and sane, and Marina Del Rey is really sort of hip and happening. So you you're really kind of in the best place in Los Angeles currently. And it doesn't surprise me that LMU is really expanded. In fact, I had a student who goes to boarding school in Canada, and she went on a summer program to LMU, but then we revisited it in the fall, I think. And she was like, Vince, I didn't realize like she had been there with the vibe and all the students running around. And
It's also good for diversity. If you want diversity, it's got good diversity.
although I have to say, I had not been to Oxy I was there this morning during the school day, and I was sitting in this space that we never used in college. So I was so excited they were using it. I couldn't believe what I saw. I mean, it's like, it was so vibrant, and, it's spring, so it's beautiful here. But it was so diverse. Almost didn't know where I was, because when I went to Oxy in my class, there were 10 minority students in 1985.
Yeah. Guess what? That was 40 years ago, Vince. It's not 1985 anymore.
But what was thrilling for me is that the person who had, they'd redone the space and it was really being utilized so well, was named after one of my classmates. So I felt like, oh,
Wow, that's pretty cool.
There's 89 coming on strong.
So did you know at the time that person was watching this person, they're going to be a mover and shaker, or was it like, wow, that's shocking?
Yes, because even then they were showing extraordinary skills, and it was interesting because they had transferred in. And I think no one from their high school thought they would become what they are today, but
usually you don't get that surprise. Like, you know what I mean? Like, look back at the students that I've worked with that are just like crushing it out here. And normally you saw that they had it in them.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be surprised by how successful your podcast is from college.
That's a nice thing to say.
Oh, dude, it's like, so like the way you bring people together. I love listening to your voice, because I don't know if you ever listened to AM radio, but when Paul Harvey was alive, I would just listen to him speak because I loved hearing his voice. You have that voice.
Oh, really, thank you. I know you're genuine. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Very kind of you. Well, Vince, you've gone on our podcast super early.
Yes.
Because I remember, you sent a donation in, and I remember I was really impressed because it was like Q&A counseling, and I was like, it's just nice when another person out here doing something supports other people out here doing things. Like, that doesn't always happen. A lot of times people don't do that. That's really how we got to know each other, because I didn't really know you before that. And then we got to talking, and now look at you. Friends, this concludes the second part. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Hillary, we have a great question from Marie from Ohio. I'm going to play the question, and then I want to hear your thoughts.
Hi, Mark. This is Marie from Ohio. My question is about the timeline for demonstrated interest. How far back do colleges look for demonstrated interest? So if a student visited as a sophomore and attended an open house, follows the school on social media, does that sophomore year count towards demonstrated interest? Or do the colleges really only look at junior year interest or increasing interest? So does the student need to visit again? What do they need to do to show continuing interest in a school they know they would like to apply to, but feel that they have already done all of the activities that would show interest in sophomore year or the summer before junior year? Thanks for the podcast and everything you do in helping parents through this process.
Thanks for this question, Marie. I really appreciate it. I think that there is a possibility that this might be different from school to school. So I can give you my take on how we look at demonstrated interest at CC and the timeline. But I would imagine it might be different other places. So
you can take my answer with a grain of salt if you want. So yes, for us, sophomore year visits to the college definitely count. When we are reading an application, on the front page of the application, there is a dashboard. That's the first thing that we see. And in the dashboard is a bullet point of any time that the student has formally engaged with us. So that could include coming for a fall open house or a summer open house. It includes a virtual interview or a virtual small group chat. It includes a virtual information session, and it includes a campus visit. So that goes back as long as the student's record has existed. So it could be like 8th grade, if that's when the student came. If they came as a younger sibling, but they were registered for it, then the student is going to show up in the database, and that's going to show up on our dashboard when we first start looking at the student. So we will occasionally notice if they've only engaged with us once and it was 3 years ago, we might notice that. But as we are thinking about the student and how, like, whether or not they want to be at CC, how long ago their visit is going to have a lot less of an impact than the ways that they answer our supplemental prompt. That's where we want them to show that they understand CC. And so that can come from coming on campus as, visitor for a campus visit, but I'm sure that students will forget a lot between their sophomore year and when they apply. And so staying engaged by reading emails, kind of paying attention to our social media, and having maybe informal conversations with a friend from your high school who goes to CC or whatever, those are things that are going to help you retain the information that you learned and sort of expand on what you learned when you were here for a visit. And being able to put that in writing in your application and through your supplemental essay is probably the most powerful way to show that you're interested. If you want to come back for a visit later, I do love it when students come for a visit, maybe as a freshman or sophomore, but then they come for an open house when they're a senior. I think that's the best way to get to know a school. And I also know that lots of students don't have the time or the resources to make more than one visit. And some students need to wait until after they've already been admitted to visit. So we try to be really flexible with that, and don't have like hard and fast rules about how recently a student needs to have engaged with us.
So a few things I never heard you say: coming by a fair and interacting at a fair, that would be engagement, right?
Yep.
Coming to a school visit if you come by the school and you show up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about sending an email to a rep with some good questions? Would you see that is that
it can be. It's the problem is that sometimes reps don't mark that in your record. And then if they leave and they don't remember, there's a lot of turnover here. So like I wouldn't use that as a substitute for going to doing some like kind of formal engagement. That should be additional, and it should be because you really have genuine questions.
So you said at the start, Hillary, I'm sure schools do it differently. Schools definitely do it differently. Both you and Connecticut College, Andy Strickler, both use affinity scores. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about what affinity scores are? They're not used by everybody, but they are very common also, especially in, private institutions that are holistic and where every kid is kind of being handpicked. But not only there. I mean, I think the growth of this on the public side is very, very noticeable to me as somebody who talks to a lot of reps about this kind of stuff. Like this stuff is feels like it's growing faster in the public school sector now, where it's been around in the private or independent school space for a long time. But why don't you talk a little bit about affinity scores?
Yeah. One place where I've seen the difference between CC and other of our peer institutions is definitely in the affinity scores. So at CC, ours is just a box that we check on the reader review form. Did the student engage with CC? It doesn't matter how many times, doesn't matter whether it was virtual or in person, it really doesn't matter. It's just like a did you or did you not? And so that adds some points onto your total score that you get when we review your application. There are other schools I know, like there was one that my younger daughter applied to that she wasn't admitted to, where you had to, on the application, check the box for all the different ways that you had engaged with the school. And she checked all the boxes that existed. She had literally done every single thing, and she still wasn't admitted, right? Like her academically, she was within range. Like she sort of all the things that we thought she needed to do to be admitted there, she had done, except applying early decision, and she wasn't admitted. So it's really interesting to me, the sort of different ways that schools approach this. And for us, it's just like can you show that you were interested by like engaging with us in one way or another, or can you not show that? But then when it really comes into play is when we're having conversations about a student, and when we're in committee or subcommittee, there's no number for this, right? This is just a conversation about like, wow, well, this student, they showed up their sophomore year for a visit. Then they came back for an open house. They did a small group chat and an interview. They wrote a really well thought out supplemental essay. Like all of these things point to this student is very interested in CC. And so that can be compelling, even though it's not reflected in a number anywhere in their application.
Hillary, you know this, you and I have talked about this outside of the podcast. A school can have a custom prompt that's almost primarily designed to test affinity. Like there's other inferences as well. You can get, certainly learn about, personal qualities and things. Can you give our listeners some guidance of the kind of wording you see in a prompt that you could say, that looks like it's testing affinity?
Yeah. Ours definitely is testing affinity. Our prompt is, well, last year, I don't know, it changes every year, but it asks students to, I don't remember the exact words, but basically talk to us about one of the 3 serious values that CC has, one of the 3 things that we care a lot about here, either wellness or anti-racism or sustainability, and talk to us about how you might engage with one of those things here. And that, for us, is an opportunity to see how a student's values overlap with ours. It's also an opportunity to see, like, can the student write well? Can they put together something that's easy for us to understand and that makes sense, right, outside of the personal statement? But it also is like, how well do they know themselves and how well do they know us? And can they see how they are going to contribute to our community and enjoy being in our community? We really want students to come here and stay for 4 years and graduate. And part of that is students understanding why they are a good fit for our community. And so when we discuss that essay, a lot of it is, did the student like take the time to understand our institution, and do they know themselves well enough to know kind of how they would engage with our institution? So I think there are probably lots out there that are a clear opportunity to, not to discuss your affinity, but to show how you would engage with a school. And then I think there are also ones out there that aren't about the school specifically, but the questions that they are asking are rooted in the values of the school. And it's an opportunity for you to show how you sort of fit into their community, even if you're not talking about their school specifically. And the fact that you've done the work to answer that question, that alone is a show of affinity. Kind of like we say that, applying during a binding decision round, early decision 1 or early decision 2, is the ultimate show of affinity or demonstrated interest. Well, actually filling out the supplemental question, that's also a really clear show of your affinity or demonstrated interest, just taking the time to do that well.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know, the more you sort of go up the selectivity tier, the more really it's, did you take advantage of early decision, and how well did you communicate that you get who we are and that you're a compelling match for who we are? And those are the things that will differentiate, because at some of the highly selective institutions, they have a lot of people that do the visits, do the second visit, do this, do that, and the other. And, those are the 2 things that I find at the most selective institutions count the most. If there's a binding option, did you take advantage of it? And did you crush it on those college-specific essays or custom prompts like that. Those are really the things that they're looking for. It doesn't mean they, some schools have tried to consciously move away from, and especially the more selective, for giving kids too much credit for doing a visit because it's such a resource, laden opportunity. I mean, not everybody can afford to, hotel airfare, rent a car meal, two parents and an adult. I mean, you could be easily, that could be a $2,000 trip easily for one, for one
and
school.
even for families,
for one school.
And even for families who can afford it, we also know that families don't always have enough vacation time. Their students are playing competitive sports, or they're engaged in some other activities that take a lot of time. And it's just really hard. And it doesn't necessarily make sense, I think, for students to go and visit every place on their list when there are so many amazing virtual opportunities available. If you're applying to a lot of places, like that's a lot of money and a lot of time to put into visiting those places. And so that's why we have all tried to maintain really robust virtual offerings, because it doesn't make sense to be flying all over the country for everyone. I guess if you have a private jet, it does, but most of us don't have that.
Yeah. And we brought up a couple of things, right? There's the resources, financial resources, the time resources, conflicting with busy student schedules. A lot of these schools are strict with how much time they let you miss school, or kids just know
and
they
like,
can't
I'd rather that you be in school. I
Right.
don't want you to miss class. I hated taking my kids out of class when they were in high school, especially junior and senior year. Those courses were hard, and missing a day of school was hard. And so I understand when students can't come. It makes sense to me. I hope that you can make it to some schools, like especially in your area, right? Like I think you do a really good job, Mark, of talking about visiting local universities to get a feel for kind of what different size schools feel like and different types of schools. I think that's awesome. But I think we have to be realistic that everybody's not going to make it to all of the schools that they're applying to.
Yeah. And, something Andy speaks out about a lot, which is we look at not visiting very differently when you're in our backyard.
Yes.
And you can't come and you're absolutely in our backyard. And,
yes.
Versus if it's going to be 500 miles or something.
Yeah.
Like
and I think that can be hard too for students, because they think like, well, when I was in third grade, I went to volleyball camp there, and that's just not the same as like going for an info session. And so I think it is important for students to know, like, if you're local, you should show up for an info session or an open house or something, despite the fact that you've driven through the campus or you had a sports camp there or whatever.
I had somebody put it to me in a different way than I've had it presented before. They were like, we could afford to travel and see these places, but I don't know if I want to get my kid to fall in love with the place only to get denied, because, a lot of times people tend to want to visit the more reachy schools on their list, which I personally think, it's very important that you don't only do that. I think that's some of the things that can make kids feel pressure. You parents can signal expectations to kids based on the places you choose to visit or not visit.
Yeah,
without, totally unknowingly putting pressure on kids. And then they'll share that in the counseling room 101. Or, we have a question on our questionnaire that asks, are you feeling any pressure from family members or peers with this college process? And kids really open up and spill their guts. But that's part of it, right? And I feel for parents because, I was having a conversation with the parent I'm working with, and he and his wife both went to one of the most selective schools in the country. And so the student grew up a big sports fan of this place. And so now sort of the natural thing is that student will ED there. And that's always kind of been the plan, and super actively involved parents in this school for a long, long time. And I had to kind of, call the parent aside, because this happens a lot where the expectations on the part of the family are not consistent with the data I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And not just for what, in this case, it wasn't just one school, but it was all the the 5 schools that were all the ones of interest. All of those were long shots. I have the data to prove it. So I had to have this conversation with the dad, and it went really well. It doesn't always go well. This one went really well. But the dad said something, and it really drives home how hard it is for parents. So without mentioning the school, I will say this. So this is a student that's test scores are in the high 1300s, and probably average level, like top 10%, right on the cusp of top 10% of the class. No discernible hooks per se. So the dad says he is so much stronger of a student than I was before I went to that school. Like every single part of him, from his SAT scores to his AP scores to his, and so it just kind of reinforces like, this is just really hard for parents. Like, that was good enough for me.
Some of us are still stuck in 1993, right?
Correct.
It's hard not to be because that's when we applied.
I know.
And so I get that. It's tough.
Well, and the extent to which these schools have changed, like people very rarely will someone I work with not know that it's harder now.
Right.
But the adjustment, right? Like to know, I mean, it's crazy. Early 90s, WashU and Johns Hopkins were taking in the 60s.
Yeah.
I think
think about Northeastern.
Oh, yeah, Northeastern. But even like a place like Chicago, I remember, 1 year when they took 3 kids from us, none of them were like at the top of their class or even like close to the top of their class. And they were taking 35%, 40%. Like I'm talking about like 05, you know, like 20 years ago. Now it's, so that's difficult. That's difficult for families. I don't know how we got off on this tangent. I feel like we were talking about demonstrated interest.
Yeah. I think the question of how to continue showing interest is really great. And I think if you, as a parent, if you look at it through the lens of what is going to help my student discern whether this is the right place for them and what is going to help them do the best that they can in answering the supplemental essay question, that you can let that guide you. So like for us, having an informational interview, which is virtual, or a small group chat, doing that in the student's senior year, in the fall of senior year, you're sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone there. You are showing continued interest, but really you are a different person at age 17 than you were when you visited at age 15. And I hope that you've changed. You may or may not have changed in what you're looking for in a school, but certainly the student has grown in that time. And so to sort of have the opportunity to talk with a current student and to ask questions and to think about you as a student, where you are now, and if this is still the best fit for you, I think that's how I would think about showing continued interest as a way to continue learning about the school and see if it's still a great place for you.
Yeah, and I try to tell families, like, if you should be a researcher, right? Like you're going to research all the way until you make a decision. I'm not even, and interest should just kind of be the byproduct of your curiosity and your interest to understand who is this school and how does it match up with what I'm looking for. If you just pursue that naturally, you'll automatically show interest and you'll do it in the most authentic way.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review for sending in that SpeakPipe question, you are going to get your choice of one of the following 4 books: College Admissions 101, Essays That Kicked Apps, The Best 390 Colleges, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to send me an email at mark@schoolmatch4u.com, put Princeton Book Giveaway in the subject line, and in the body of the email, put the title of the book you want and put the episode number where we discussed your question, and just share a brief description of the question that you asked.
Thanks, Marie from Ohio.
Thank you, Marie.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, we've reached the final part of the great debate. Me debating Summit Prep co-founder David Blobaum, who speaks frequently around the country on the topic of the case for test scores. In part 3, I share a position that one of MIT's competitors has that I agree with. I share a reason why I do not believe using first-year GPA is a valid way to see how well a non-test submitter is doing in college. David pushes back a little and shares why there is some validity to looking at first-year GPA in his opinion. David talks about the big fish, small pond concept that Malcolm Gladwell frequently refers to. I push back by talking about individual autonomy over your own life decisions. David shares the most compelling reason why he holds his view that highly selective colleges should require test scores. David and I talk about how test scores can increase your merit scholarship. And then David goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Listen and enjoy. Curriculum is such a revealer. Like, I don't have a problem, for example, at a really rigorous institution and looking at an engineering student and saying, I want to see AP Physics and I want to see AP Chem and I want to see good grades and evidence of strong performance in those classes. Like, correct. So to me, the problem with testing is I agree that this is my overall belief. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, because I think that the little value it adds, if you're really looking at curriculum, and the other thing you can do is you can do profiles of the schools of your feeders and see what type of success record you've had with that. Now, listen, there is a flaw in my argument, and it is, what about the school that doesn't have rigor? You know, what about the school that we don't have a track record with? And I get that. That is a challenging situation. Some schools have attempted to do things. Caltech was creating a program for people that only had pre-calc to come in and get ramped up. I mean, different schools have done different things to try to address that if they've been ambitious in that area. But I think that, because I'm never asking any school to come in and admit kids that can't do the program. But here's something else that I would say. I was having a conversation with one of MIT's competitors. It's a test optional school. Okay. And they had a big problem with MIT requiring testing. And they accept very similar kids, lots of overlap. And they were pointing out, you know, MIT is saying, well, kids without test scores have lower GPAs. And this individual said to me that, for one, how many of those kids are you even admitting with lower scores to even have enough of a sample size? One. But then he said something that I really, really resonated with me. He said, you know what? Our research would show the same thing. Those kids have a 3.2 instead of a 3.4. But look at the value that they add to our community because of the different backgrounds they're coming with. That is so additive. Is it that big of a deal that they have a 0.2 lower GPA? So some of this stuff is coming by putting such a big emphasis on what the grade point average is, or first year grade point average, when I think they should be looking more holistically. And the other thing, and this isn't oftentimes measured in these studies, you know, I'll sometimes say to a student or parent, how do you think your kid would do if you just transported them all across the world to a completely different culture, and how would they do in their first year in this foreign culture in that environment? Probably be some adjustment issues. So if you're talking about kids that are coming from really non-traditional backgrounds, why should you expect that there's not transition issues? I think the whole concept of first year GPA is a terrible way to measure people from completely dissimilar environments than the culture of these colleges. I think using 4-year GPA is one metric. And I know retention, graduation, things like that. And I understand that that's going to probably not quite be as the same, because the more dissimilar environment you're coming from, the more of an adjustment shock it is. You're probably going to have a little bit of slippage. So I don't think you should expect kids from completely dissimilar backgrounds to have the exact same graduation rate and the exact same retention rate. But I get it needs to be a certain level. You need to be able to show that if you're going to bring kids in, they're able to be successful. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, shouldn't you expect there to not be the exact same GPA if someone's coming completely, let's just say, Native American reservation, and you're taking a kid and they're going to add so much, you don't have anybody like that, and they can help educate people around them about what that experience is like? And so what? So they have a little bit lower GPA. You're gonna say, well, we don't want that kid because our research shows they don't have the same GPA.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one thing, there's trade-offs to everything. So the measurement of first-year GPA, it's not perfect. One of the benefits to it, though, is, students do drop out or they transfer schools. But the biggest factor that goes under the radar is a lot of them will transfer majors if they're not doing as well in a given major. And so that's why they want to pick up the first-year GPA, because it's not just about having a student get into a school and then, okay, they graduate. That's great. But did they transfer out of their STEM major because they were doing really poorly because they couldn't hack it in that STEM major? And just to also, you had mentioned engineering, and I just think there's a good case study on that, which speaks to transparency. Most schools don't publish the percent of admitted students who submitted test scores at all, but especially based on major. University of Illinois does. 59% of students at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana submitted test scores. For the School of Social Work, it's only 28%. For the School of Engineering, it's 81%. So just for listeners, it's not just about the college overall, how maybe truly test optional or test preferred it might be. They're obviously very truly test optional for School of Social Work. They're definitely test preferred for School of Engineering. So just major matters as well. But as far as should we care if a student does a little bit worse? And for that, I mean, you've actually talked in past episodes about the big fish, small pond. Mm-hmm. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about that in his book, David and Goliath. And he says that, and this is a quote, the best students from mediocre schools were almost always a better bet than good students from the very best schools. So one of my concerns there is that kid with a 3.2 at the very good school, they actually might have improved their life chances if they had gone to a slightly easier school, but had gotten a 3.8 GPA, right? They might have been an all-star at a slightly lower ranked school, but instead they were near the bottom of their class. And Malcolm Gladwell was using data from 2014 on PA students who then went on to go and publish, and it was dramatically different rates. It was these good students from great schools had 1/10 the publishing rates of students with lower SAT scores who then just went to an easier school, right? So there was another study in 2011 from the Air Force Academy, and what they did is they wanted to see pure effects. They wanted to have the strongest students around the lower performing students, so that ideally the really strong students would wear off on the underperforming students. So they took those students, top scoring and low scoring, put them in a cohort together, put all the medium students in a cohort together. They had to end the study early because those lower performing students were dropping out at a higher rate than had ever happened in the Air Force academies. The middle students actually did better than average because it was actually about, do you feel like you're smart? Do you feel like you can compete? And so my concern there is larger delta between students. The students at the low end might even do worse. And also big fish, small pond, you might actually want those students who are at that lower end to go to a school where they're going to be a rock star.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good in theory, but in reality, one, people have agency. And like for example, I oftentimes say there's advantages to being a big fish in a small pond, right? In general. But in reality, one, people have the right to make that decision themselves. And then secondly, when you are an admission officer at a school, that is your world and you're trying to make your school better. And so what I'm saying is one of the reasons why the overwhelming majority of admission officers like test optional policies is because they see very exciting kids that are really hard to attract. And that's all kinds of things, right? It's everything from socioeconomics to rural to unique cultures and locations and interests. It's all kinds of things. They see really, really exciting kids that they feel could add so much to their school that now they have this gatekeeper thing that is going to preclude them from being able to get this kid through. And when you're in admissions, you actually do have a lot of tools. You have a lot of tools. Like curriculum is really, really important. You have stuff like landscape and things, school profiles. You have your institutional history where you can go on and take a look at kids. And then you also have all of the personal qualities and things that you observe. Like, and every once in a while, a risk is worth taking. Sometimes it's worth taking a few risks, just like any employer will tell you that, you know what, sometimes I took a risk on this person and I'm glad that I did. And that's the same thing that's true in the college admission process. Doesn't always have to be like squeaky clean all the time. But the reason why admission officers do not like test mandatory policies is for that exact reason. They feel like we have enough tools in our toolkit to be able to discern if this kid is a good enough, this person can come in here and add. And what we're going to have is less of those kids getting in, more homogeneity, and that's not actually going to make our school better. So, like, you know, you can give them some David and Goliath and Malcolm Gladwell thing, but I exist in the world of my own school and me trying to make my school better. And so I don't like it when I see something that could help my school. And now there, in some ways you can almost compare it to, I don't know why this popped in my head. It's going to seem like totally out in left field. But one of the things that Governor Shapiro did in Pennsylvania was he got rid of the requirement for degrees for a lot of government workers. And so it's sort of like same thing, right? Like we see some talent here, but people weren't even getting a chance because they never had that piece of paper. And we know they can do the work. And that's how a lot of admission officers feel like we see talent. We see someone who could come in here and add, but now we're going to erect this barrier. And now it's going to be so much harder to get them through the process. And all that's going to do is actually make our school not as interesting and as exciting. And so much of the transformation, if you actually talk to students that occurs in college, it comes from meeting dissimilar people from dissimilar backgrounds who challenge you to think about things or to understand things because they're very different from who you grew up and who you hang around. And so that component of learning gets lost. And I would argue that weakens the classrooms, it weakens the dorms, it weakens the critical thinking, it weakens the overall educational experience. And I think we're seeing some of that because some of the schools have come out with some of their data as they've returned to testing, and some of it has shown that they've become less diverse. Once again, I want to reiterate, maybe somebody would be better as a big fish in a small pond and going to a less selective institution, but that's their decision. That isn't my decision. It could be that going to the more selective school could introduce them to a network that could change the trajectory of their family lineage. I can't judge that. They have their own right to make that decision for themselves. So, I think we agree on some things. We don't agree on everything. It's been a good conversation. I want to move. We have a lightning round for our first time guests, so I'm going to put you on the hot seat here in a second. But you guys can't see Dave. He's got a big smile on his face. I really appreciate the spirit of which we have these conversations. And I think that I never doubt that you come from the standpoint of wanting what's best for students and best for schools. I think we share that in common. Anything else you want to share, David, on this topic that hasn't been said?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. My takeaway, if I could talk to schools, would be please more transparency. If you say that you don't disadvantage students, like let's see the data on that, because so often when we see the data, it shows an opposite reality.
No, I agree 100% on that. And I always admire the schools that just come out and say it the way that it is. I think we definitely need more transparency. And even, when Dartmouth announced on this podcast, actually, Lee Coffin, that they were going to a test recommended policy before they went to mandatory, I appreciated that. Because if that's their view within the office, then I appreciate that. The one thing about this conversation that gets tricky for me is at the end of the day, when I'm talking to a student, it still basically boils down to this. This is what I say. Test optional schools still like high test scores. The best scenario for you would be to submit high scores. The second best would be no scores, and the worst is low scores, and low scores is completely contingent on the institution. Low for one could be high for another. And still, that still is the bottom line. So then it becomes a matter of, well, how much time and effort should I put into this? And that's where I'm going to say, look, in most cases, it's absolutely worth prepping. I believe most people should prep, not crazy amount, not have it become an extracurricular, but put some time into prepping and to do it within your budget. And for some people, that'll be self-prep. Some it'll be group. Some it'll be one-on-one. All it's going to be different from kid to kid. And then do your best at that. And then let's look at it on a school-by-school basis, whether it's we're submitting. So like this, the end of the day, I still give that advice because submitting low scores does not help you. If anything, it scores can knock you out. I know it may seem hypocritical. Why are you arguing against test mandatory admissions? And then you turn around and say you believe putting in some test prep for the ACT or SAT is worth it for most people. I don't see it as hypocritical because with David, I am arguing for the world as I wish it was if I was in charge. But at the end of the day, I'm still a pragmatist, and I have to live in the world as it is. So when it comes to testing, David's point about unlocking scholarship money is another example of this. I may like it if some colleges didn't have a test score component for how they award merit aid, but the fact is many do. So this leads me to recommending test prep in most instances. Any thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I also think, to your point, it depends. And we've talked a lot about test scores for getting into college, but test scores can also be really important for affording college. So, for instance, Mississippi, if you have a 23 on your ACT and a 3.0 GPA, then you're going to get $12,000 total to go to the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. And, you look at a state like Georgia or Arkansas, 0% of their state grant aid is need-based. It's 100% merit. I'm using air quotes, merit-based. So, if you're from Florida, if you're from Georgia, you might really want to take a look at these automatic scholarships that you can get from a certain test score. And this is according to Fair Test data. 46% of state grants to students require SAT and ACT scores. So test scores can be important, not just for getting into college, but for affording college as well.
No, that's a really important point. And we would have been remiss to talk an hour in here and not talk about that. Georgia's a little different because the Hope Scholarship requires a 3.0 in your academic GPA, and only 3 of the 26 Georgia colleges, Georgia Tech, and Georgia College, actually require testing. The other 23 have a sliding scale of like a 3.4 or a 3.2 or a 3.0 can waive the test. But the point is still well taken that don't be naive that there is still a correlation at a lot of places between testing and some type of scholarship. Not all, but some. And people should know that for every single school they're looking at and not be naive. And sometimes prepping is just a good business decision. You're going to get in, but like you said, you spend $3,000, you get $12,000. Like that was a good business decision. And so that's not something to be naive about. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Dave. You ready for the hot seat?
Let's do it.
What would your advice be to your 18-year-old self?
Wait for a good woman to marry.
Is that spoken from someone who learned the hard way?
No comment.
Okay, there you go. The hot seat can't get too personal. I do think that that's true. I think I've kind of told people, this is just my bias. I'm like, I think people, it's not as bad as it used to be, but waiting until your 30s, you tend to know yourself a lot better than you do at 22 or 23 or 24. Anyway, next thing you know, we'll be talking about marriage. All right. I love that advice. All right. You can't do test prep. What other interest would you have if you had to earn a living some way? Let's just say completely outside of the educational realm. Can't be an educator in some capacity. What would you be interested in?
I think I would go for the CIA. So, I mean, not to be a plug for the CIA, but they offer the ability to get paid your full-time salary and go to school. So they'll literally pay for you to get graduate school degrees and get your full-time salary, plus school is free for you. I mean, the benefits are amazing. It's very interesting. So honestly, if the CIA had paid as much as test prep, I would be in the CIA right now.
Cool. What's your favorite sport?
I don't know. Pass. I'm really not into sports, right? So I guess I would say once every 4 years, the World Cup.
Okay, once every 4 years. What's your favorite place you've ever traveled to?
The Maldives.
What makes the Maldives so great?
It doesn't feel like real life. And I'm glad I'll never go back there again because it was an insane plane trip. But I'm glad that I got to do that once. It's so safe. You're on a tiny little island and you get to fly over just some of the most beautiful scenery you've ever seen. So it was a trip of a lifetime.
Awesome. What's a book that you recommend our readers read?
So I was in second grade. I didn't get to go to the my second recess of school because I was such a slow reader that I needed to do remedial reading programs. And then after third grade, I read the book Hatchet, and it was about a kid who wanted to live or a kid who was living in the woods. And I just absolutely fell in love with reading. Read 50 books that summer. Entered school the next year, top of my class, and that book changed my entire life. So if there's anyone who doesn't like reading, maybe check out Hatchet. Maybe it'll have the same transformative impact on you.
All right, now you got to tell us more. So what was your takeaway from Hatchet that changed your life?
So I used to tell my parents, ironically, that I didn't need to learn how to read because I was going to go live in the woods. And so then Hatchet is about this kid who he gets in a plane wreck and all he has is this hatchet and he has to survive in the woods. And it just opened up this world of reading that I absolutely loved. Gary Paulson's the author, and those 50 books I read, they were literally all by Gary Paulson. I just started devouring everything that I could read, and I'm a big reader today. I think that reading is the most important skill that students can learn in school because reading impacts everything. It impacts how quickly you're going to read, how much you're going to understand what you read. That impacts history, psychology, biology, even reading math problems. So big proponent of reading, and it's also going to make you typically a lifetime learner. And, I got a executive MBA, but I've learned more from business books that I've read than from my executive MBA. So I think the smartest people in the world have written books, and they're just waiting for you to read them. So I just couldn't say enough about reading.
That is so powerful and so on point and something I agree with 100%. That's a drop the mic moment. I want us to end there. Thank you so much for coming on, Dave, and we're happy to have you as a listener of Your College-Bound Kid. Keep up the work.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Mark.
Friends, I want to share two conversations I had on this subject after my debate was over with David Blobaum. The first was with a friend of mine who's a college counselor. And we met up at the SACAC conference in Atlanta. And she was just sharing with me how she doesn't like test optional admissions policies. And the main reason she gave was the following. She's like, as you know, Vanderbilt has told us they don't want to see a 33 in the ACT. So now a kid has to have a 34 just to submit their test scores to Vanderbilt. And she went on to say, at the rate we're going, schools are going to say, if you don't have a 36, don't submit. And the point she was making, and in my opinion, it is arguably the strongest argument against test optional policies, is the following. We are artificially raising test score averages and adding more stress and anxiety on these kids to get the 34 today and who knows, maybe the 36 tomorrow. While I acknowledge that is a problem, and it is indisputable that having a test optional policy contributes to this, because if you're only finding half of your applicants are submitting, of course your averages are higher. And how can I not agree that this adds more pressure to get an even higher score? But I still didn't find that argument cogent enough to make the case for returning to compelling test scores.
for all the reasons you've heard me articulate in this debate with David. The strongest argument being numbers do voodoo on the brain and admission officers cannot put them in proper context. I know I struggled with that for my whole 8 years in admissions. It was really bad in the first 4, but I didn't really get that much better after that. I should have shared this story in my debate with David Blobaum. Before I interviewed Lisa Prescott of UCSB, we were just having a chat, and mind you, this was before the UCs had adopted a test-free policy, which if you're not familiar with test-free, it means that even if you want to send your ACT or SAT, we're not going to consider them, and we don't want to know what they are, so don't send them. So I'm just talking with Lisa before we hit record, and Lisa says to me, we're considering not having our admission officers read the ACT or the SAT all the way until after the decision is made at the end. And what is most important is the reason she stated. She said, I don't think we can handle seeing those scores and not have them introduce a bias into our reading process that will overpower all of the other admirable qualities the student possesses. And this is the primary reason why I am not in favor of test mandatory admissions. Now, Lisa Prescott at that time was in year 38 in the UCSB office, and she still didn't trust that she had the experience to put scores in proper context. So while I respect the position that my friend was making at the SACAC conference, to me, on balance, it's still not compelling. But here is what it did do to my thinking. It made me think even more fervently that a college can do the research to see what test scores correlate with academic success in their own context, find the number that they believe a student needs to have in order to be successful in their program. Let's just say it's a 1200 SAT or 24 ACT. They can ask a simple question on the application. We don't want to know what your test score is, but we just want you to answer yes or no. Did you get a 24 on the ACT or higher, or a 1200 on the SAT or higher? Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. All a student is going to do is lie. But here's why I think this would actually work. Hundreds of colleges allow a student to self-report their SAT or their ACT on the Common App without sending official scores. And only if they enroll do they then have to submit official test scores for verification. And I've asked many admission officers if they see discrepancies between what the student self-reports and the final scores. And I have not had one single one tell me they do. And of course, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, it would be pretty asinine to lie and say you hit the standard, the 24 or the 1200, and I just made a number up. The number could be 21 or 1,000, or it could be 1,431. That part's not relevant. It would be pretty preposterous for you to lie and say you hit the standard, only to have to show proof once enrolled and have your admission offer rescinded for a lack of integrity. Now, last week I met with Jed Appleruth, who's as much of a scholar on the test as anyone I know. We've had Jed on multiple times on the podcast, founder of Appleruth Tutoring and Testing. And I don't want to put words in Jed's mouth, but I'd say his position is quite similar to David Blobaum's. And I met with Jed to ask him two things. One, would you like to come back on our podcast and talk about the very exciting things you're doing for AP prep? And he said, sure. So you can look for that in January, February of 2026. But I also met with him to share my idea. I said, Jed, what are your thoughts of having each school do their own independent research, find out what score a kid needs to be successful, and instead of knowing the actual score, just have the kid check a box and say they hit the score, and they can send a verification later. Not only did Jed like this idea and believe it could work, and remember, he's a big proponent of colleges using test scores, he said it would also address another problem in testing. He said a lot of times a kid will get one or two answers wrong, and it'll cause a score to drop like 50 points. And it's absolutely not statistically significant, those 50 points. But my fear is that some schools do use those 50 points to make significant admission decisions based on them. So he actually liked it a lot. And the evidence just shows this is not true. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my debate with David Blobaum
We're trying to be more creative and give different content to you in different ways.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, we've reached the final part of my interview with Jim Bock, Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore College and Swarthmore College grad. I asked Jim to talk about Swarthmore's wooded Arboretum campus. I asked Jim to share how Swarthmore and Haverford differ. Jim shares a little bit about the BICO and the TRICO consortiums. Jim explains what it means for a college to be a liberal arts school. Jim explains what skill set a Swarthmore liberal arts education inculcates in its graduates. I asked Jim about several financial challenges colleges are facing, and I asked him how these financial challenges are impacting admissions. I asked Jim if he sees colleges that are not landlocked trying to expand their class size as a way of bringing in more revenue. And Jim goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Listen and enjoy. You know, Jim, one thing we haven't talked about, and I would add this to the list, is beautiful campus. Can you talk a little bit and paint the picture of your Arboretum-style campus you have over there? It's quite spectacular.
Thank you so much. And I can't believe I didn't lead with that when you talked about, so in the Uber, we are a 425-acre arboretum. So the entire campus is an arboretum, half of which are buildings and greens, some of which you would see on a tour with a tour guide or a self-guided tour. But then half of our acreage is wooded acreage known as the Crum Woods. So it's an existing woods. We didn't create it. So it predated Swarthmore. And it's wonderful to know that you have 250 or 210 wooded acres, knowing that you're only half an hour by train to the sixth largest city in the country. So access to an urban center plus a suburban. And we're not rural, but the woods feels pretty rural when you're in the woods. And there's hiking trails and biking trails. We have the Crum Creek. And in a couple of weeks, I'll be the Commodore at the Crum Regatta during our Yield Day program, where students design and build their own boats and race them up and down Crum Creek. And I get to kick off that race and give out the awards. And it's just a really great way to get off campus while realizing you're still on campus. And we have 4 seasons here. So we truly have a winter, a spring, a summer, and a fall. So everything is just beginning to bud right now. We have a cherry blossom festival in April. I think we have as many, if not more, horticultural visitors annually as we do prospective student visitors. So a lot of Arboretum conferences are held here at the Scott Arboretum. So it is the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College. If you took the train here and you went under the train tracks up, it would be about a 200-yard walk straight up to Parish Hall, which is the original college, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So I encourage your visitors, if they can, to make a visit. It made a huge impression on me when I was 17.
That's good. That's good. The other school that people will often visit if they come see you is Haverford. It makes sense. 2 schools with Quaker roots and histories, both liberal arts, and what are you, 10 miles away from each other? You're pretty close. You're also part of a TRICO consortium with them in Bryn Mawr. You've already mentioned that, you know, Haverford was all males until the late 60s or whatever. You were founded co-ed. What are some other differences between Swarthmore and Haverford?
No, I appreciate the question. And there is a strong relationship. It's called the BICO. It's Bryn Mawr and Haverford. And so that's an advantage for those two, is they're literally about a mile apart. And we're 30 minutes south down what we call the Blue Route, or 476. So we're in southwestern Pennsylvania. And again, they're 30 minutes north of us. And Haverford, I believe, is a little bit smaller. We're about 1,700. And again, I don't want to guess their number. But when you have...
Yeah, they're about 1,300. So they are definitely smaller. Yeah.
And I say, you know, they're both excellent schools. We have the Arboretum, they have the Duck Pond, we have the honors program, they have the honor code, and I love the honor code. So if you want an honor code, look at Haverford, look at Conn College, look at University of Virginia. So there are differences. And then where we tend to not like them is that that's our arch rival in athletic competition. So we love to beat the Fords, and the Fords love to beat the Garnet. And so it's friendly competition, but they are our arch rival within the Centennial Conference. But a lot of similarities in terms of academics. And then I did want to mention, it's not specific to Haverford, but the TRICO has the first TRICO major. So if you're a linguistics major at Haverford, Bryn Mawr, or Swarthmore, you take classes at any one, they all count towards the major, towards that institution. So as prices tend to go up, we're thinking, how can we work together as a trico or a bico to sort of keep expenses. And right now you can send faculty around, but what if we sent students around? We also have, I think it's trico in the city, where you take your courses in Philadelphia, but they're taught by Haverford or Swarthmore faculty and or Bryn Mawr. I think it's definitely Haverford. I think Trico and Philly. It's all three. And so there are, I think, a lot of similarities between Haverford and Swarthmore. And not that we're not similar to Bryn Mawr, but Bryn Mawr is single sex. So again, Haverford went co-ed quite successfully in the late 60s, early 70s. We've been co-ed from day one, and we're just a little bit larger. And again, 30 minutes south, but a lot of similarities academically and intellectually.
Let's talk about the liberal arts. So, a lot of people have no idea what that means. They've heard the term all the time. Love for you to tell our listeners what it means for a school to be a liberal arts school. And I'll ask you two questions at the same time and break all those rules you're not supposed to do. What does a liberal arts education inculcate when it comes to a skill set that helps graduates in the real world?
So two questions: mean and skill set, or definition. Well, I would say it's actually neither a liberal philosophy nor just arts and music and English. So liberal arts means sort of the study across disciplines. So the way we define that is that you need to take classes in the humanities, English, philosophy, religion, languages, in the social sciences, economics, politics, political science, history, sociology, anthropology, and in the natural sciences, biology, chemistry, and for us, that includes engineering. So it's really interdisciplinary in its approach. And again, different schools take a different approach. So I'm here to promote other colleges. So I think of Chicago, which has the core, and Columbia has the core. Brown and Amherst have open curriculum models. So they all promote liberal arts, but some are more prescribed. Hey, we know what we're teaching and we think you should know these skills. Others say, hey, you know what, you're adults, take what you want to take. And then most of us have some of those distribution requirements. So what it means is that you're going to be well-rounded, that if you never take another class in this discipline, you may have written across the disciplines, again, in the humanities, in the natural sciences, and in the social sciences. So coming in as political science economics, was really interested in social sciences, never dreamed of being a humanities major, but took a religion course strictly on whim. I had 4 years of English in high school, so why would I take that again? It's not that I didn't like English, but I took religion and philosophy and things I didn't have access to in high school. I never dreamed of taking engineering, but I wasn't a big biology fan, so I took engineering, astronomy, statistics. Turns out statistics are very important for the admissions person, and so I might have needed a few more stats classes. But the point is, particularly for students who don't know what they want, or if they do know, it really gives you that breadth of experience across disciplines. So that's the meaning. Then the second question is skill set. So why is that important? Don't you need to be set for a job? And you hear that today. College isn't worth it. If it is, I need a skill. I need a skill for a job. Well, I ask your listeners, tell me what the jobs of tomorrow are going to be. Right? Where things are changing so quickly. Now, you need skills and insights on science to be a doctor, right? There are certain skills and knowledge you need to grow in the discipline. But again, as I mentioned, my roommate who's a doctor majored in history, and he said, listen, I'm going to learn no history in medical school, which was good. They taught him science. But it was really important that he be a good writer, be a good researcher. And the skill set is critical thinking skills, working in small teams. And I think large universities are good and they have a lot of grad students. But here at the residential liberal arts college, you're taught by full faculty, and all your courses are taught by faculty who have their terminal degrees. And that sort of the skill set, again, of critical thinking skills, problem solving, and working in teams will set you well for the future.
So, Jim, I know there are a lot of threats to the finances of colleges these days with all kinds of things, right? COVID, and then just concerns, demographic cliff, all kinds of different challenges coming at schools now. And so I know that a lot of colleges are concerned about this. And so some of the different things I'm hearing out there from chief enrollment officers and others in the enrollment management field that are happening. I just want to throw several of these things out, and I'm curious whether you're hearing this at all in your networking. One is trying to expand the class if possible. A lot of people are landlocked and can't do that. Another is taking more students early decision, so you can be more predictive, or using more sophisticated methods of predictive modeling. Some schools that maybe were need blind are maybe functioning more in a more need aware, capacity, concerned about decreased international students and what's happening in the world and whether they'll get visas or that kind of thing. Are any of these concerns or others things you're hearing in your network? Is colleges, after all, are businesses, and they do need to balance their books.
No, that's right. And I've heard some of that. I will say I've heard less recently because we've been in committee making decisions. But as we come up for air after decision,
you're so focused.
yeah.
I love
But
it.
what you've said, I have heard. And, possibly I wouldn't be surprised by increased wait lists, in particular, given concerns about students achieving visas. So if it's not that we're changing necessarily admissions policies, and students may want to come, they may matriculate, but then if they go sign up for the visa and can't get one, then they can't come. And so that's not lack of interest, but that's just the ability to enroll, right? And so having sort of that backup plan, and what you mentioned, possibly scholarships, we're extremely fortunate. We meet needs, so we've not changed any policies. But like you said, you have to sort of look ahead and see how that impacts. And I will say, I think there are also different challenges for those with grad programs versus undergrad. And so time will tell how both may be impacted. Though a school that has a grad school is impacted, that might trickle down to undergrad. Or like you said, hey, since we're losing some students here, can we shore up the undergraduate population? And may need to look at, policies on need blind or need aware. And for those who don't understand, it sounds pejorative, but need blind means we don't consider finances when making a decision. Need aware means that a college might take that into account when making final decisions. And so I echo what you've heard, and I've heard a little bit others. And that the one I would have added was the sort of the wait list piece is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I actually meant to ask you about that. So it makes sense for more wait lists, because wait lists in some sense is an insurance policy, because I always tell parents it's pretty hard to know what your own 18-year-old is going to do, right? Well, think about if you have to bring in X number of 18-year-olds. It's very difficult to predict the behavior of hundreds of 18-year-olds. So do you think there'll also be more going to wait lists? Because they're two different things, right? There's going out and waitlisting more kids than you normally would as an insurance to hedge your bet if you don't get your yield. But then there's actually going to your wait list. Do you think that there's going to be more of that? And this is not so much a Swarthmore question, it's just your sense of the national landscape. I think it's good that you pointed out that graduate school distinction, because I'm sure we all know, right? Neighbor to not too far away, Penn had to rescind graduate school admission decisions because of unexpected tsunami that came their way.
Right. So again, like you said, I'll echo you back. What are 18-year-olds going to do tomorrow? What are they going to wear? What are they going to choose? And so every year is a little bit different. And I'll throw something else in. The FAFSA is working this year, and it wasn't last year. But will they have access to those funds? So that's kind of the unknown. So sort of what we don't know is what we can't control. And so I actually don't want to be a prognosticator, because I'm really not sure what students will have access to. Now, if they got the FAFSAs in, schools can determine need and have budgets. But if the money doesn't come, that's a little bit different question, right? So it's a little bit too early to predict. And so it goes to back what you said before, right? Maybe they're admitting a little bit more, or they're putting more on the wait list to see where they land. And then, like you said too, some are quote landlocked, or they house everyone, so they can't over enroll because they're not. They're going to have a new dorm built by August. So the problem is, if you over enroll, you have to accommodate those students. Was something I read in the Chronicle, where you have to land your airplane in the aircraft carrier when your gauges aren't working in the rain at night and try to land that plane. It is very, very difficult. So I would say we're used to this in the sense of COVID, but there are just some challenges that we can't predict. But I think everyone is trying to plan to the best of their ability.
The expansion of the class, can you see that being something that might take effect more in 2026 or 2027, when somebody could plan and could say, you know what, we have a little time, Maybe, and I'm talking about schools that are in the position, because I'm not talking about people that are just going to be so grateful if they meet their class, but people that are in a position, we know we're turning away extraordinary applicants we could yield. We could do it without much of a quality drop off. Yeah, we can't turn it around for, well, right now you're working really for, the class of 2020, maybe 2026 or 7. Do you see some of those conversations being more likely to happen if finances continue to be a challenge for those who are able to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard those conversations on and off for the last several years. And, schools that don't require housing or that just need a little bit more tuition revenue and have the capacity. And again, to what we'd said before about students, that might put a little more emphasis on the undergraduate enrollment if they're missing those student bodies. Now, that's different because of the research. It's a whole different model. Not all of those grad school professors want to be teaching undergrad. So there's also a teaching piece, right? It's not just housing. And again, classes can only get so large. And I think, like you said, it may be larger institutions that have that, but then there are schools that are just struggling to fill classes. So it's hard to increase a class when you're struggling to get your current target. So it really varies based on where you are in the market.
Let's transition, Jim, to what we call our lightning round. No first time guest ever gets away without going on the hot seat.
All right.
And so I'll start out by, what advice do you have to your 18-year-old self?
Perfection is not the answer. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just sometimes has to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that over time from a dean, of how she counseled students and said, it doesn't have to be perfect, just turn it in.
There you go. That's good. When I was a freshman in college, I remember my first trimester, I pulled 7 all-nighters. And the reason why is because I couldn't, I marked up my books like crazy. I'm writing notes in this. I'm supposed to read 100 pages a night. And here I am highlighting everything, writing everything in the column. And finally I realized this isn't going to work. So I took a couple speed reading classes and learned that. So, I had to go through that myself. Yeah, most definitely. How do you relax? What do you do in your free time? How do you chill?
Yeah, how do I chill? I actually, believe it or not, I'm on 2 intramural teams. So I play intramural soccer, and I used to be on the I-20s, which is the form that international students fill out. And now I'm on Cutie Pies, and my recent captain is from Australia. So that's kind of cool. And I also play pickleball, and I'm on a team with a professor from the computer science department, someone from our finance department, and a student. And so it sounds silly that I actually get back to campus to relax, but just getting out, and whether it's running, walking, playing soccer, but more recently the pickleball and outdoor intramural soccer.
I'm impressed, because if you're class of 90, you're probably north of 55. You're out there being active. Good for you. Don't put any muscles.
Please edit that out of my age out of the final cut, please. Thanks, Mark.
What's on the bucket list?
Bucket list. I have not. I've had the great fortune to travel to a lot of places as part of my job. I've never been an international dean, but I have represented the college abroad. But I've never been to Japan. I would love to go to Japan. My father, who I didn't know, spent part of his childhood there after World War II. And so that's a place that I've always aspired to get to and haven't done that, but I hope to in the not too distant future.
Love it. That's awesome. So one last admissions question. What's your admissions pet peeve? What's the thing that grinds your gears?
Oh, wow. There's not a lot that grinds my gears. What pops into my mind is the phrase I hear from students and parents and the way they phrase it. We want to apply early decision. We just don't know where. And there's 2 problems with that. One, it's not we, it's I, it's the student's decision. And 2, early decision is not a game and a strategy. Early decision or early action is because you've done the homework, you've done the research, you've been able to hopefully visit a place, if not virtually in person. And you know what? Every time you come back to the pros and cons list, this one school just keeps popping up. That's a really good reason for early decision, not because you're trying to beat the system. And so we just need to educate. And I do think there is a problem of the paradox of choice. And so I'm going to recommend some reading. The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz, a former psychology professor. I wouldn't be a good SWATty if I didn't give homework in this podcast.
Yeah, of
But
course.
too much choice, right? And it's like the
Yeah.
college admissions process. There are 3,000 colleges to choose from. So what do? We rely on rankings, we rely on our friends, we rely on, some good data and really bad data. But you got to do the homework, just like you do everything. And that you should, at the end of this, come up with several or 6 or 7 or 8 first choices, that any of these schools on the selectivity list would be a good fit for you. And there's got to be more than one when there's 3,000. And I'm not saying the process is easy, but again, this idea of it's a strategy and a game to be won as opposed to a fit to be found. So it's that, we want to go early decision. We just don't know where. I push back on that.
I think a lot of admissions people are probably saying amen to that. It's something that I totally get it. So last question, but it's a triple one. What is your advice to students, parents, and college counselors who are listening?
Yeah. Breathe is one. I think we forgot to breathe sometimes.
I hope so. You're not going to live if you don't breathe.
We're having a hard time breathing now, maybe given what's going on around us. Just to continue to breathe, that it should be a marathon and not a sprint. I think what gets people into trouble is they start the process too late. You don't need to start it early. It's not first year, maybe sophomore, but by junior year, you just need to be thinking about what kind of place would be good for me, big, small, medium. I actually do love Big Futures for College Board, which, you can actually put in stuff. I want to be in this region, this size school that maybe now has psychology and art, because that's what I'm thinking. At least that's a start, right? And it will narrow the list for you. And then you can see, oh, I don't like that place or this place. So it's a marathon and not a sprint. And then the third piece is to set a calendar. We schedule everything. We schedule our practices, hopefully our homework, our jobs, but we don't tend to schedule college admissions. And the story. The parent asks, "Hey, how's the essay coming? How's the essay coming? How's the essay coming?" It's like, leave me alone. And it's like, well, what if we talked about the essay or anything else after, over lunch or dinner on Sunday? And you probably hear this a lot from folks, but having a calendar for the college admissions process. And I would say, listen to the advice of counselors. If you don't have one, I understand that. But many students work with community-based organization folks. I understand some students are, the top of their group. And so the counselor's like, hey, you're going to be fine. I'm dealing with my other caseload, right? So there's school counseling as opposed to college counseling. And I understand folks don't have that. A lot of it is free. I'm not pro or con independent counselors. I'm pro good independent counselors, just like I'm pro good anything. And so the information is out there. You can still get it the old fashioned way in books. There are a lot of good books, and guidebooks are a place to start. You can also do that online. So again, continue to breathe. It is a marathon, not a sprint. So start a little bit early, and again, set a calendar.
Jim, thank you so much. You've been most generous of your time. You've given us 70 minutes. I appreciate you. And will I see you in Columbus, Ohio? You'll be at NACAC again this year, 2026?
It's possible.
Or is it Cincinnati? No, Columbus.
Columbus, and it historically has overlapped with my board meeting, and it didn't this year. So we'll see. But I hope to see you in person. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's great to see you even virtually through the screen. So I appreciate the time.
No, thank you so much. Once again, thank you, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Take care.
By the way, today, April 22nd, is when I'm recording this. And I just want to shout out the over 150 college presidents who all co-signed a letter literally today condemning the administration's attempt to withhold federal funding unless colleges allow the administration to have their policies dictated to and decided by the federal government. I'm convinced if we are going to see this 250-year-old democracy survive the threats of authoritarianism, it will not be from one courageous soul or from one courageous university, but it will be because people bandied together, made their voice heard in mass. So shout out to those 150 plus presidents. By the way, the signatories were a range of schools, from large public universities to small liberal arts schools, and they included each of the Ivy League schools
except for Columbia and except for Dartmouth. Now, one of my favorite quotes was made famous by JFK in a speech in 1961, but it's actually believed to have been written by Edmund Burke. And this is the quote: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Now, that was 65 years ago. So to put it in today's language, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and good women to do nothing. On Monday's episode, I'm going to share a few stories from the 2 tours I had while visiting Trinity College yesterday in San Antonio. I'm going to share something you need to know about acceptance rates, and I'm going to share some thoughts I've been thinking quite a while concerning peer pressure. Then we'll have part 3 of 4 of Lisa's interview with Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny Anderson, the 2 authors of the best-selling book, The Disengaged Teen. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. And I believe that with every fiber of my being. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.com website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.